I was a Saudi prince who secretly funded Christian missions for years. Then I died for 48 hours.
I was pronounced brain dead by my doctors at 11:47 p.m. on a Wednesday night in Riyadh. For 48 hours, machines kept my body breathing while my family prepared for my funeral. But I wasn't in that hospital bed. I was standing face to face with Jesus in heaven, and the first words out of my mouth when I met him were, "You're supposed to be just a prophet." I had prayed to Allah 5 times a day for 42 years. I had fasted every Ramadan. I had made pilgrimage to Mecca 3 times, but none of it prepared me for the moment when Jesus looked at me and said, "Khalid, your good works are filthy rags compared to my holiness." What he showed me next would get me exiled from my own country. This is my undiluted near-death experience. My name is Khalid Ibrahim Al-Rasheed, and I am 42 years old. And I was born into one of the extended branches of the Saudi royal family in Riyadh. My father is a cousin to the current king, which means I grew up with wealth and privilege that most people cannot even imagine. I attended the best schools in Saudi Arabia, then went to Oxford University in England, where I studied international business and politics. When I returned home, I took a position managing some of our family's business interests, which included oil investments, real estate developments, and various trade companies across the Middle East. To the outside world, I was everything a Saudi prince should be. I prayed 5 times a day at the mosque. I fasted during Ramadan. I had performed Hajj to Mecca 3 times. I knew the Quran by heart and could quote it in any discussion. I was respected, wealthy, and considered a model Muslim by everyone who knew me. But there was another side to my life that no one in my family knew about. For almost 10 years, I had been secretly helping Christian organizations across the Middle East. It started during my time at Oxford, when I became friends with some Christian students. I was curious about their faith, especially their complete confidence about heaven. They talked about Jesus with such certainty and joy, something I had never felt despite all my prayers and religious duties. They gave me a Bible which I read in secret. I was particularly drawn to the words of Jesus in the Gospels. His teachings about love, forgiveness, and grace were beautiful to me. But I could never accept that he was God. In Islam, we honor Jesus as a prophet, but to say he is divine is the greatest sin, or what we call shirk. Still, I wanted to help his followers because I believed that doing good works for others, especially for people of other faiths, would surely earn me favor with Allah. Over the years, I had developed an entire secret network to funnel money to Christian causes. I used shell companies registered in Dubai and Bahrain to hide the transactions. I worked with trusted intermediaries who never knew my real identity. Through these channels, I'd funded underground churches in Saudi Arabia, where Christians met in secret to worship. I'd paid for thousands of Arabic Bibles to be printed and distributed across the Gulf states. I had supported Christian orphanages in Lebanon and Jordan. I had provided safe houses for believers who fled persecution in Iraq and Syria. I had given millions of dollars, and maybe tens of millions over the years. Every time I authorized another payment, I felt good about myself. I thought I was building up treasure in heaven. I believed that on the day of judgment, when Allah would weigh my good deeds against my sins, the scale would tip heavily in my favor. How could it not? I was not just a Muslim doing the minimum required. I was going above and beyond, helping even the Christians, showing tolerance and generosity. Surely my place in paradise was secure. I remember the exact moment when everything changed. It was a Wednesday evening in late April. I had just finished a video conference call with one of my intermediaries in Beirut. We had discussed a new project to help Syrian Christian refugees who had fled to Lebanon. These were families who had lost everything when ISIS destroyed their villages. They needed housing, food, medical care, and schools for their children. I had just authorized a payment of $12 million to establish a relief center for them. As I ended the call, I felt that familiar warm feeling of satisfaction. I had done something good. I had helped people who were suffering. God would surely reward me for this. I said my evening prayers with extra devotion that night, thanking Allah for giving me the wealth and position to do such charitable work. I went to bed feeling spiritually content, perhaps more than I had ever felt before. I woke up around 3 a.m. with a strange sensation in my throat. At first, I thought maybe I'd slept in an awkward position. But as I became more fully awake, I realized something was wrong. It felt like there was pressure on my neck. hummed like someone had their hands around my throat, but not quite choking me. I got up and went to the bathroom to look in the mirror. What I saw made my blood run cold. There was a swelling on the right side of my neck, just below my jaw. It was about the size of a golf ball, and it had definitely not been there when I went to bed, just a few hours earlier. I touched it gently, and it was hard, almost like bone. It did not hurt when I pressed on it, but the pressure on my airway was unmistakable. I tried to swallow, and it was difficult. I could feel the mass blocking the normal passage. My first thought was to call my personal physician, Dr. Faisal Al-Zarani, who had treated our family for 20 years. But it was 3 a.m, and I did not want to seem like I was panicking over nothing. Maybe it was just a swollen lymph node, or maybe I was fighting off an infection. I decided to wait until morning. I went back to bed, but I could not sleep. The pressure seemed to be getting worse. Every time I swallowed, it felt like I was forcing something past an obstacle. My breathing was becoming more laboured. I had to concentrate on each breath, making sure I was getting enough air. By the time the sun rose at 6, I knew I could not wait any longer. I called Dr. Al-Zarani and told him what was happening. The concern in his voice was immediate. He told me to meet him at King Faisal Specialist Hospital in Riyadh within the hour. He said he would call ahead and have the emergency department ready for me. I dressed quickly and told my wife, Amira, that I needed to go to the hospital for some tests. I did not want to alarm her, so I made it sound routine. But she saw the swelling on my neck and insisted on coming with me. Our driver took us to the hospital, and the entire drive I kept thinking about that mass on my neck. How had it appeared so suddenly? What could cause something to grow that fast? I tried to push down the fear that was rising in my chest, but it was difficult. I had always been healthy. I exercised regularly, ate well, and had never had any serious medical problems. This did not make any sense. When we arrived at the hospital, Dr. Al-Zahrani was waiting for me at the emergency entrance. He took one look at my neck and his expression became very serious. He did not waste time with small talk. He immediately ordered a series of tests including blood work, a CT scan, and a biopsy of the mass. The next few hours were a blur of medical procedures. They drew what seemed like dozens of vials of blood. They injected me with contrast dye that made me feel hot and strange. They slid me into the CT scanner, which hummed and clicked as it took detailed images of my neck and chest. Through it all, the mass seemed to be growing. I could feel it expanding, pushing harder against my windpipe. Breathing was becoming more difficult with each passing hour. By early afternoon, I was struggling to get enough air. They gave me oxygen through a nasal tube, but it did not seem to help much. The pressure was mechanical, physical. Something was blocking my airway, and no amount of supplemental oxygen could fix that problem. I could see the worry on Amira's face as she sat beside my bed. She held my hand and recited verses from the Quran, praying for my healing. I wanted to comfort her, but I could barely speak. Every word required effort and made the breathing worse. Dr. Al-Zarani finally came back to my room around 4 in the afternoon. He had another doctor with him, an oncologist named Dr. Muhammad Al-Qahtani. That was when I knew it was cancer. You do not bring an oncologist unless you are dealing with cancer. They both sat down, and Dr. Al-Zahrani pulled his chair close to my bed. He looked me directly in the eyes and said he was going to be completely honest with me. The CT scan showed a massive tumour wrapped around my trachea and esophagus. The blood tests and preliminary biopsy results indicated it was an extremely aggressive form of cancer, likely lymphoma, but they would need more tests to be certain. What they did know for certain was that the tumour was growing at an alarming rate. It had probably doubled in size just since I had arrived at the hospital that morning. Dr. Al-Qahtani explained that this type of rapid growth was very rare and very dangerous. The immediate threat was not the cancer itself, but the fact that the tumour was about to completely block my airway. If that happened, I would suffocate. They needed to do an emergency procedure to secure my breathing, either by intubation or possibly a tracheostomy. I remember feeling strangely calm as they explained all of this. Perhaps it was shock, perhaps it was denial, or perhaps it was my deep belief that Allah would not let me die. Not after all the good I had done. I had helped so many people. I had given so much money to worthy causes. I had lived a good life, a moral life, a generous life. Surely God would reward that. Surely my good deeds would count for something. I told Dr. Al-Zarani to do whatever was necessary. I trusted him completely. They decided to try intubation first, threading a breathing tube down my throat past the tumour. If that did not work, they would have to cut a hole in my neck below the tumour to allow me to breathe. They moved me to a surgical suite and gave me sedation. The last thing I remember before losing consciousness was saying a prayer in my mind, asking Allah to spare my life so I could continue doing good works in His name. I never imagined that the next time I opened my eyes, everything I believed about God, about heaven, about salvation, and about my own eternal destiny would be completely shattered. The intubation procedure failed. I learned this later from the medical records, but at the time I had no idea what was happening. The tumour had grown so large and so fast that the breathing tube could not get past it. The doctors tried twice, and both times the tube got stuck. Meanwhile, my oxygen levels were dropping dangerously low. My heart was struggling because my brain and organs were not getting enough oxygen. The surgical team made a quick decision to perform an emergency tracheostomy, which meant cutting a hole in my neck below the tumour and inserting a tube directly into my windpipe. But even as they were preparing to do this, my heart stopped. The lack of oxygen had been too much. One moment the monitors were beeping frantically, and the next moment there was just a long, flat tone. I was dead. But I did not know I was dead. What I experienced was the strangest sensation I have ever felt. Suddenly, I was no longer in my body. I was floating above the operating table, looking down at everything happening below me. I could see my own body lying there on the table. My neck was swollen and discoloured. There was a tube in my mouth. There were IV lines in both arms. The doctors and nurses were moving frantically around me. I could see Dr. Al-Zarani standing at the head of the table, and he was shouting orders. One of the nurses was preparing a scalpel. Another was getting a crash cart ready. A male nurse had his hands on my chest and was starting to do compressions, pushing down hard and fast, trying to restart my heart. I watched all of this with a strange detachment, as if I were watching a medical drama on television, not my own death. I tried to call out to them, to tell them I was fine, that I was right here, but no sound came out. And I had no voice because I had no body. I was pure consciousness, awareness without physical form. I could think clearly. I could see and hear everything. But I could not interact with the physical world anymore. I watched as they cut into my neck. I saw the blood. I saw them trying to get the tracheostomy tube in place. I saw the monitor showing that flat line, meaning my heart had stopped completely. I saw Dr. Al-Zahrani's face, and even from above I could see the fear and frustration in his eyes. He knew he was losing me. Then, as if pulled by some invisible force, I drifted away from the operating room. I floated through the wall and found myself in the hallway outside. That is where I saw Amira. She was sitting on a bench with her face in her hands, sobbing. Her whole body was shaking with grief. There were puddles of tears on the floor beneath her. My sister Noor was sitting beside her with an arm around her shoulders, also crying. Several other family members were standing nearby, all looking devastated. I moved closer to Amira. I tried to touch her shoulder, to comfort her, to tell her not to cry. But my hand passed right through her. I had no physical substance. I was like air, like a ghost. I spoke to her, saying her name, telling her I was okay, but she could not hear me. She had no idea I was standing right next to her. The helplessness I felt in that moment was terrible. I wanted so badly to comfort her, to wipe away her tears, and to tell her everything would be all right. But I was completely powerless. I was dead, and there was nothing I could do for the people I loved. I turned away from Amira and suddenly felt another pull, much stronger this time. The hospital hallway began to fade. Everything became bright, so bright that it should have hurt my eyes, but it did not. The light was warm and welcoming, not harsh. And then, in an instant that felt like no time at all, I was somewhere else entirely. I was standing in a place that I can only describe as a courtyard or a garden. The first thing that hit me was the absolute peace. The fear, the pain, the struggle to breathe, all of that was completely gone. I felt lighter than I had ever felt in my life. I felt whole and complete and perfectly at ease. It was like being wrapped in the warmest, most comforting embrace imaginable. I took a deep breath, my first real breath in hours, and the air was so clean and fresh and sweet that it was almost intoxicating. And I looked around, trying to understand where I was. I was standing on a path made of stones that seemed to glow with a soft golden light. On both sides of the path were trees unlike any I had ever seen on earth. They were massive, with trunks as wide as houses and branches that stretched up so high I could not see the tops. The leaves were a green so vivid and pure that the trees in our world look almost grey by comparison. And the trees were making music. I know that sounds impossible, but I heard it clearly. Each tree was producing a gentle humming tone, and all the tones blended together into a beautiful harmony. It was like listening to an orchestra, but the instruments were living trees, and they were singing worship. I understood somehow, without being told, that these trees were praising God continuously, and they had been doing so since the moment they were created. There were flowers everywhere, lining the path and filling the spaces between the trees. The colours were so intense and so beautiful that I almost wanted to cry just looking at them. There were reds deeper than rubies, blues brighter than sapphires, purples richer than amethysts, and colours I had never seen before. Colours that do not exist on earth, colours I do not even have names for. And like the trees, the flowers were also producing sounds, delicate high notes that wove in and out of the deeper tones from the trees. Every living thing in this place was engaged in worship, creating a symphony of praise that filled the air. And each plant had its own fragrance, and all those fragrances blended together into a scent so wonderful that I wanted to just stand there and breathe it in forever. It was fresh like morning air, sweet like jasmine, clean like rain, all at once. I started walking along the path, drawn forward by something I could not explain. I noticed a river running alongside the path, and the water was so clear and pure that I could see straight to the bottom, even though it looked deep. The water sparkled like it had diamonds dissolved in it, and it made a gentle bubbling sound as it flowed over smooth rocks. I wanted to reach down and touch it, to drink from it, but something told me to keep walking. I walked past shrubs that were perfectly shaped and healthy, with no dead leaves, no brown spots, no imperfection of any kind. Everything was alive in a way that nothing on earth is alive. Everything was more real, more solid, more present than anything I'd ever experienced. Colours were more colourful, sounds were more clear. The air itself seemed to be alive with energy and light. As I walked further into this garden, I became aware that the light was coming from everywhere, and nowhere at the same time. There was no sun in the sky, yet everything was illuminated perfectly. There were no shadows. The light seemed to come from the air itself, or perhaps from the plants and trees. And then I realised that the light was carrying something with it. It was carrying love. I felt loved in a way I had never felt before. It was not the love of a spouse or a parent or a friend. It was bigger than all of that. It was unconditional, complete, total acceptance and affection. I felt valued and treasured and cherished. I felt like I was exactly where I belonged, like I'd finally come home after a long journey. The feeling was so strong that tears started running down my face. I was crying, but they were tears of joy, tears of relief, tears of gratitude. Then I saw someone standing in the distance. It was a figure of a man, but he was surrounded by so much light that I could not see his features clearly. He was standing at the centre of the courtyard, near what looked like a fountain or a pool. The light around him was brighter than anything else in this place, and I understood immediately that he was the source of all the light I was seeing. The light was not just coming from him, it was him. He was radiating it from his very being, and that light was what carried the love I was feeling. He was the source of the love, the peace, the joy. Everything good in this place was flowing from him like water from a spring. I stood there staring at him, and I felt drawn to him like metal to a magnet. I wanted to go to him. I needed to go to him. Every fibre of my being was pulling me in his direction. But I was also terrified, because in that moment, I knew exactly who he was. This was not Muhammad. This was not any of the prophets of Islam. This was Jesus. I recognized him somehow, even though I had never seen him before, and my mind was racing with confusion and fear. I was a Muslim. I had been taught my entire life that Jesus was just a prophet, a good teacher, but nothing more. I had been taught that Christians were misguided for worshipping him as God. I had been taught that the greatest sin was to associate partners with Allah, and Christians committed that sin by calling Jesus the Son of God. Yet here I was standing in what could only be heaven or paradise, and the person radiating all this light and love and power was unmistakably Jesus. Not Muhammad, not Allah as I had imagined him, but Jesus, the one I had dismissed as merely a prophet, the one whose followers I had helped, but whose divinity I had denied. I did not know what to do. Part of me wanted to run to him. Part of me wanted to run away. Part of me thought this must be a trick or a test. Maybe this was not really heaven. Maybe I was being deceived. But even as these thoughts raced through my mind, I felt that overwhelming pull toward him. And underneath my confusion and fear, there was a deeper knowledge, a certainty that I could not explain. This was real. This was truth. And somehow, I had been wrong about everything. All my prayers, all my fasting, all my good deeds, all my charity, all my efforts to earn my way into paradise, none of it had prepared me for this moment. Because the person standing before me was not the God I thought I had been serving. He was someone else entirely, someone I had spent my whole life refusing to truly know. I do not know how long I stood there staring at Jesus in the distance. Time felt different in that place, like it did not exist in the same way it does on earth. But before I could decide whether to approach him or not, I felt another powerful pull, this time pulling me backwards, away from the garden. The beautiful courtyard began to fade, and suddenly I was back in my body on the operating table. The sensation was jarring and painful. One moment I was in perfect peace, and the next moment I was drowning in agony. My chest hurt terribly from the compressions they had been doing. My throat was on fire. My neck felt like it had been torn open, which it had. I could not breathe properly, even with the tracheostomy tube they had managed to insert. Every attempt to pull air into my lungs felt like breathing through a straw that was half blocked. I could not open my eyes, but I could hear everything. Dr. Al-Zahrani was saying that they had my heart beating again, but my oxygen levels were still critically low. Someone else was saying that my lungs were filling with fluid. Another voice said there was blood in my airway. They were suctioning something out of the tracheostomy tube, and I could hear the horrible gurgling sound. The pain was indescribable. It felt like every nerve in my body was screaming. I wanted to go back to that peaceful garden. I wanted to escape this broken, dying body. And then, mercifully, my heart stopped again. The pain vanished instantly, and I found myself immediately back in that same garden courtyard. There was no floating above my body this time, no drifting through hallways. One second I was on the operating table in agony. The next second I was standing on that glowing path, surrounded by singing trees and fragrant flowers. This time I did not hesitate. I started walking quickly toward the figure of light in the distance. But as I got closer, someone stepped into my path. It was a man who looked to be about 60 years old, with a kind face and warm eyes. He was wearing simple white robes, and he was smiling at me with such joy and recognition that I stopped in my tracks. I looked at him carefully, trying to understand why he seemed familiar. And then it hit me. This was my uncle, my father's younger brother, named Yassir. He had died 15 years ago from a heart attack. But this was not Uncle Yassir as I remembered him from his final years, when he was overweight and sick and tired. This was Uncle Yassir, as he must have looked in his prime, healthy and strong, and full of life. Uncle Yassir embraced me, and I felt the same overwhelming love radiating from him that I felt from everything in this place. He stepped back and looked at me with tears of happiness in his eyes. He said my name, Khalid, and told me how wonderful it was to see me. I was so confused. I asked him how he could be here. Uncle Yassir had been a Muslim like everyone else in our family. He had prayed at the mosque and fasted during Ramadan and made pilgrimage to Mecca. But he had also been different in one way that the family rarely talked about. In the last 5 years of his life, he had become very interested in Christianity. He had asked questions that made people uncomfortable. He had read books that were forbidden. There were rumours that he had even attended a secret Christian meeting once, though no one could prove it. When he died, some family members whispered that perhaps he had lost his faith, but most preferred to remember him as a good Muslim and not talk about his strange final years. Now, standing before me in this heavenly garden, Uncle Yassir answered my unspoken question. He told me that yes, he had become a follower of Jesus 3 years before his death. He had kept it secret from almost everyone because he knew what the family would do if they found out. He would have been disowned, he maybe even killed, so he had continued to attend the mosque and go through the motions of Islamic practice, while privately praying to Jesus and reading the Bible. When he died, he had come to this place, to heaven, not because of his good deeds or his prayers or his charity, but because he had put his faith in Jesus as his saviour. He explained that he had been praying for me for years, even after his death, asking Jesus to reveal the truth to me the way it had been revealed to him. I had so many questions, But before I could ask any of them, Uncle Yasir told me that I needed to understand something very important. He said that everything I had been taught about salvation was wrong. In Islam, we believe that our good deeds must outweigh our bad deeds on the Day of Judgment. We believe that Allah keeps a record of everything we do, and if the scale tips in our favour, we go to paradise. If it tips against us, we go to hell. And even if we go to paradise, we are never really sure until that final judgment happens. There is no certainty, no guarantee, only hope that we have done enough good to earn our place. Uncle Yasir told me that this entire system was false. He said that no amount of good deeds could ever be enough to satisfy the perfect holiness of God. Even one sin, just one, was enough to separate us from God forever. And all of us had committed thousands of sins, maybe millions, from the moment we were born until the moment we died. He explained that this was why Jesus had to come. God knew that humans could never save themselves through good works. The standard was perfection, and none of us were perfect. So God himself came to earth in the form of Jesus, or lived a perfect life without any sin, and then died on the cross to pay the penalty for our sins. Jesus took the punishment that we deserved. He satisfied the justice of God on our behalf. And now anyone who believes in him and accepts his payment for their sins can be saved. It is not about what we do. It is about what Jesus did. Salvation is a gift, not a wage. We cannot earn it. We can only receive it by faith. Uncle Yasir looked at me with such intensity and said that all my good works, all my charity, all my help to Christians and orphans and refugees, none of it could save me. It was all good and worthwhile, but it could not pay for even one of my sins, let alone all of them. I felt like the ground was shifting under my feet. Everything I had believed, everything I had built my life on, was being challenged. I told Uncle Yasir that I'd given millions of dollars to help people. I had funded churches and Bible distribution and refugee relief. Surely that counted for something. He smiled sadly and told me that helping Christians was wonderful, but it did not make me a Christian. Giving money to churches did not give me a relationship with Jesus. I had been like a man standing outside a beautiful house, admiring it and even paying for repairs and improvements, but never actually going inside to live there. I had honoured Jesus from a distance, but never surrendered my life to him. I had treated him like a good teacher, a prophet, someone worthy of respect, but I had never worshipped him as God. I had never acknowledged that he was the only way to heaven. Uncle Yasir then took my hand and led me to another part of the garden. We walked past more incredible trees and flowers until we came to a place where I could see other people in the distance. They were all wearing white robes like Uncle Yasir, and they all had that same look of perfect peace and joy on their faces. He pointed to a woman who was tending to some of the flowers, arranging them with such care and delight. He told me that was his mother, my grandmother Fatima, who had died when I was just a child. I barely remembered her, but I knew she had been a devout Muslim woman who prayed faithfully every day. I asked Uncle Yasir how she could be here. He explained that in the final week of her life, when she was dying of cancer, a Christian nurse had shared the gospel with her. At first, my grandmother had rejected it angrily, but the nurse had been so kind and patient, he continuing to care for her with such love, that eventually my grandmother had listened. On her final day, just hours before she died, she'd quietly prayed to accept Jesus as her saviour. No one in the family knew. She'd been too weak to tell anyone, but Jesus knew, and when she died, she came here. I saw other people as well, people I did not recognise, but Uncle Yasir identified for me. There was a distant cousin who had converted to Christianity while studying in America and had hidden his faith for years. There was an aunt who had been given a Bible by a co-worker and had secretly read it until she believed. There were others, scattered members of my extended family over several generations, who had found Jesus in quiet, hidden ways and had kept their faith secret to avoid persecution. None of them had been perfect, and none of them had earned their place here through good works. They were here because they had accepted the gift of salvation through Jesus Christ. And standing there, listening to Uncle Yasir explain all of this, I began to understand the magnitude of what I had missed. I had spent my whole life trying to be good enough, trying to earn heaven, trying to tip the scales in my favour. And all along, there was a free gift available that I had refused to accept because I thought I could do it on my own. Uncle Yasir told me something else that shook me deeply. He said that I needed to understand the difference between religion and relationship. Islam was a religion, a system of rules and rituals, and good works meant to earn God's favour. Christianity was not supposed to be a religion at all, though many people had turned it into one. Christianity was meant to be a relationship with God through Jesus Christ. It was about knowing God personally, intimately, as a father knows his child. It was about love and grace and forgiveness, not about keeping score of good deeds and bad deeds. Jesus did not come to give us another set of rules to follow. He came to give us life, real life, eternal life, life lived in connection with God himself. Uncle Yasir asked me if I had ever felt that kind of connection with Allah. Had I ever felt close to him? Had I ever felt certain of his love? Had I ever had a conversation with him where he spoke back to me? I had to admit that I had not. My prayers had always felt like talking to the ceiling. I prayed because I was supposed to, because it was my duty. But I never felt like anyone was listening or responding. Our Uncle Yasir smiled and said that was because Islam could not offer what I truly needed. What my soul was longing for was not rules or rituals. It was relationship. And that relationship was only possible through Jesus. He told me that when I returned to my body, and I would return, I needed to remember everything I was learning here. I needed to stop trying to earn my salvation and simply receive it as a gift. I needed to stop treating Jesus as a prophet and start worshipping him as God. I needed to surrender my life completely to him, not out of duty or fear, but out of love and gratitude for what he had done for me. As Uncle Yasir was explaining all of this, I felt that pull again, yanking me backwards. I tried to resist it. I wanted to stay and learn more. I wanted to see my grandmother up close. And I wanted to walk further into this garden and discover all its wonders. But the pull was too strong. The garden faded away, and I was back in my broken body once more. Back in the chaos of the operating room. Back in the pain and the struggle for breath. Back in the world of death that I had just briefly escaped. The second time I returned to my body was even worse than the first. The medical team had managed to restart my heart again, but my lungs were in terrible condition. They were filled with blood from all the damage caused by the emergency procedures. Every time the ventilator pushed air into my lungs, it met resistance from the fluid. My body was failing rapidly. I could hear the doctors talking in urgent tones about my brain. Someone said that I had been without adequate oxygen for too long. Another voice mentioned that my brain activity was nearly flat. Dr. Al-Zarani was arguing with someone about whether to continue trying to save me or to let me go. The pain throughout my body was unbearable, but worse than the physical pain was the frustration of being so close to that peaceful place and being yanked back to this suffering. I wanted to scream, to tell them to stop, to just let me die and return to the garden. But I had no voice and no control over anything. The medical team worked frantically for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. They were trying to drain the blood from my lungs, but more kept filling in. They gave me medications to try to stabilize my heart and blood pressure. They adjusted the ventilator settings over and over. I'm trying to find some combination that would get enough oxygen to my brain and organs. Nothing was working. My body had been through too much trauma. The tumour in my neck had caused massive damage when they cut through it to place the tracheostomy. I had lost a lot of blood. My heart had stopped twice already and was weakened. My brain had been starved of oxygen for extended periods. According to everything medical science understood, I should not have survived this long. And then for the third time, my heart stopped. The monitor went to that flat line again, and this time I heard Dr. Al-Zarani say something that chilled me, even in my dying state. He said that even if they got my heart started again, I was already brain dead. The scans they had done showed almost no brain activity. I would never wake up, never speak. I would never recognize my family. I would be a body kept alive by machines, but with no person left inside. But I did not hear what happened next because I was gone. This time, the transition was instantaneous. There was no floating, no observing my body, no drifting through hallways. One moment I was in agony on the operating table, and the next moment I was standing in that garden again. But this time was different. This time I knew I was not going back. Something deep inside me understood that my body was finished. The damage was too severe. The doctors would not be able to revive me a third time. Or if they did, there would be nothing left of me to revive. I was dead. Truly and finally dead. And I was home. The peace that washed over me was even stronger than before because there was no more tension, no more fear of being pulled back to that broken body. I was free. I took a deep breath of that pure, sweet air and felt joy bubbling up inside me like a fountain. I looked around the garden, taking in all the beauty once more. The singing trees, the fragrant flowers, the crystal river, the golden light that filled everything. It was all still there, exactly as I remembered, but now I could appreciate it more fully because I knew this was permanent. I was not just visiting. This was my new reality. I would never have to leave this place, never have to return to pain or suffering, or fear or death. I started walking along the path, and this time I walked with purpose. I knew where I was going. I was going to find Jesus. I needed to talk to him. I needed to understand why I was here when I had been a Muslim all my life. I needed to know what this all meant. As I walked, I saw Uncle Yasir again, and he smiled and waved at me but did not approach. It was like he knew I had somewhere else to be, someone else to meet. I waved back and kept walking toward the centre of the courtyard where I'd seen that figure of light before. As I got closer, the light became brighter, but not in a way that hurt. It was warm and welcoming, like walking toward a fireplace on a cold night. And then I saw him clearly for the first time. Jesus was sitting on a stone bench beside the river of life. The river sparkled like liquid diamonds as it flowed past him. He looked up as I approached, and his eyes met mine. Those eyes were the most incredible thing I have ever seen. They were filled with such love, such warmth, such complete acceptance that I felt my knees go weak. The eyes were a colour I cannot fully describe, something between green and brown and gold, with flecks of light that seemed to dance in them. But more than the colour, it was the expression in those eyes that undid me. He looked at me like I was the most important person in the entire universe, like there was nothing else he would rather do than sit there and talk with me, like he had been waiting for this moment for my entire life. I walked up to him, and without even thinking about it, I fell to my knees. Not out of religious duty or ritual, but out of pure, overwhelming emotion. I had spent my entire life praying to a God I could not see, could not hear, could not feel. And now I was kneeling before God himself in human form, and he was looking at me with more love than I had ever experienced from anyone. And tears started pouring down my face. I tried to speak, to say something, anything, but all that came out were sobs. I was crying so hard that my whole body was shaking. Jesus reached down and put his hand on my shoulder, and the moment he touched me, I felt a warmth spread through my entire being. It was like being filled with liquid light. He said my name, Khalid, in a voice that was both gentle and strong, and he told me to stand up. He said we had much to talk about and much to see, and I could not do that very well while sobbing on my knees. There was humour in his voice, kindness, not mockery. He was not making fun of my tears. He was simply inviting me to compose myself so we could begin. I stood up, wiping my face with my hands, though the tears kept coming. I sat down on the bench next to him, and he waited patiently until I could breathe normally again. Then he began to speak, and what he told me over the next hours or days or however long it was completely transformed everything I thought I knew about God, about heaven, about creation, about sin, about salvation, and about myself. He started by addressing what I had not even asked yet, but what was burning in my mind. He said that I was confused about why I was in heaven, when I had been a Muslim. He said that I needed to understand something crucial. I was not in heaven because I was a good person, or because I had given money to charity, or because I had helped Christians. I was in heaven because in the final moments of my life, in those brief seconds when I had returned to my body the second time and heard the doctor saying I was brain dead, and I had cried out to him in my spirit. I did not remember doing this consciously, but Jesus said that deep in my soul, I had called out to him and asked him to save me. He explained that in that moment of desperation, when I finally understood that all my good works meant nothing, when I realized I was facing death and judgment with no confidence in my own righteousness, I had reached out to him in faith. It was not a long prayer or a formal conversion. It was just a cry of the heart, like the thief on the cross who simply said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus had responded the same way he responded to that thief 2,000 years ago. He had said yes. He had accepted me. He had forgiven all my sins in an instant and credited me with his own righteousness. That was why I was here. Not because I deserved it, but because he had given it to me as a gift. Not because I had earned it, but because he had purchased it with his own blood on the cross. I sat there stunned, trying to process this. I had no memory of crying out to Jesus, but he said that it had happened in a place deeper than conscious thought, in the core of my being, where the soul knows truth, even when the mind is confused. Jesus then began to teach me, and I can only share a small portion of what he explained because it was so vast and so deep. He walked with me through the garden, and as we walked, he talked. He explained creation to me in a way I had never heard before. He told me that in the beginning, before anything else existed, there was only God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, three persons, but one God, existing in perfect love and perfect unity. And out of the overflow of that love, God decided to create. He spoke the universe into existence, not because he needed anything, but because he wanted to share his love and his glory with created beings. He made the angels first, spiritual beings to serve and worship him. Then he made the physical universe, the stars and planets and galaxies, and finally he made Earth as a special place where he would create humans in his own image. He explained that humans were unique among all creation because we were made to have a relationship with God. We were not just servants like the angels. We were children, made to know God as a father and to reflect his character in the world. That was what it meant to be made in God's image. We had the capacity for love, for creativity, for moral choice, for relationship. God placed the first humans, or it's Adam and Eve, in a perfect garden, much like this one I was in now, and he walked with them and talked with them every day. There was no barrier between God and humans. There was no sin, no death, no suffering. It was paradise. But God had also given humans free will because love cannot be forced. If we were programmed to obey, we would be robots, not children. So God gave Adam and Eve a choice. They could trust him and obey him and continue in perfect relationship with him, or they could rebel and go their own way. Jesus explained that when Adam and Eve chose to disobey God and eat from the forbidden tree, they were not just breaking a rule, they were rejecting God himself. They were saying that they did not trust him, that they wanted to be their own gods, that they knew better than he did. And that choice, that rebellion, brought sin into the world. Sin is not just bad behavior. Sin is separation from God. It is a broken relationship. And because God is the source of all life, separation from God means death. Not just physical death, but spiritual death, eternal death, complete and final separation from everything good and loving and true. Adam and Eve did not drop dead physically the moment they sinned, but they died spiritually in that instant. The relationship with God was broken. They were cast out of the garden, and every human born after them inherited that same broken relationship, that same separation from God, that same condition of spiritual death. Jesus told me that this was why all the religions of the world, including Islam, could not save anyone. They were all human attempts to fix the broken relationship, to earn our way back to God. I'm to prove that we were good enough to deserve his acceptance. But no amount of good works could fix what was broken, because the problem was not our behavior. The problem was our nature. We were born spiritually dead, separated from God, and dead people cannot make themselves alive. Only God could fix this problem, and he did it in the only way possible. He came to earth himself, in the person of Jesus Christ, and lived the perfect life that we could not live. He never sinned, not even once. He perfectly obeyed God the Father in every thought, word, and deed. And then he willingly went to the cross and took upon himself the punishment for all human sin. Every sin ever committed by every person who ever lived, past, present, and future, was placed on Jesus. And he died the death that we deserved. He experienced the full weight of God's judgment against sin. He was separated from the Father, which is why he cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Jesus explained that this was the only way to satisfy both God's justice and God's love. Justice demanded that sin be punished. The penalty for sin was death. But love desired to save us, so Jesus took the punishment himself. He paid the price we owed. And then 3 days later, he rose from the dead, proving that he had defeated sin and death and hell. Now anyone who believes in him, who trusts in what he did, rather than trying to save themselves through their own efforts, can be forgiven and restored to relationship with God. It is not about being good enough, it is about accepting the gift. Salvation is free, but it cost Jesus everything. As he explained all of this, I wept again. I understood for the first time what the cross really meant. It was not just a sad story about a good man dying. It was God himself absorbing the consequences of human rebellion so that we could be forgiven. It was the most profound act of love in all of history. And I'd rejected it for 42 years because I thought I could save myself through my good deeds. Jesus and I continued walking through heaven, and he showed me things that took my breath away. We walked through meadows filled with flowers that swayed and sang in worship. We crossed bridges over streams so clear that I could see fish swimming in them, fish that were more colourful and vibrant than any I had seen on earth. We passed through groves of fruit trees, and Jesus picked fruit and handed it to me. When I bit into it, the taste was so incredible, so pure and sweet and satisfying, that I understood why the Bible calls heaven paradise. Everything here was perfect. Everything was exactly as it should be. There was no decay, no death, no wilting or fading. Everything was eternally alive and healthy and beautiful. As we walked, Jesus continued teaching me, answering questions I carried my whole life about the Bible, about prophecy, about God's plan for humanity. He explained to me how the Bible was written. He told me that God had inspired men over hundreds of years to write down his words, but he had allowed them to use their own personalities, their own writing styles, their own cultural contexts. That is why different books of the Bible sound different from each other. Moses wrote differently than David. David wrote differently than Paul. But all of them were inspired by the Holy Spirit to write exactly what God wanted them to write. Jesus explained that when people see contradictions in the Bible, it is usually because they do not understand the context or the purpose of different passages. Some parts of the Bible are historical narrative. Some parts are poetry. Some parts are prophecy. Some parts are teaching letters. You have to read each part according to its purpose and context. When you do that, he said, you will find that the Bible tells one unified story from beginning to end. And that story is about God's love for humanity and his plan to redeem us through Jesus Christ. He also explained to me about the new heaven and new earth that he will create when he returns. He told me that this current heaven where I was standing was temporary. It is real and it is wonderful, but it is not the final destination. When Jesus returns to earth at the end of time, he will judge all of humanity. Those who have rejected him will be separated from him forever, not because he sends them away, but because they have chosen to live without him. Those who have accepted him will be given resurrected bodies, bodies that are physical like our earthly bodies but perfected, incapable of sin or sickness or death. Then God will create a new heaven and a new earth, completely fresh and new. Not just a renovation of the old one. The old earth and the old heavens will pass away completely. And in this new creation, heaven and earth will be united. The new Jerusalem, the city of God, will come down from heaven and rest on the new earth, and God will dwell with his people forever. Jesus explained that in this new creation, we will not be floating on clouds playing harps like the old cartoons suggest. We will have real physical bodies, and we will live on a real physical earth. We will eat and drink and work and create and explore and learn and grow. But there will be no more sin, no more pain, no more tears, no more death. The curse that came into the world through Adam's sin will be completely removed. We will live in perfect relationship with God, seeing him face to face, and also in perfect relationship with each other. There will be no more war, no more hatred, no more jealousy, no more selfishness. Only love and peace and joy forever. He told me that the house I would live in here in this current heaven was just temporary housing until that great day when everything would be made new. As he explained all of this, I felt such excitement and hope building in me. The future was more glorious than I had ever imagined. We walked for what seemed like days, though there was no day or night in heaven, no sun rising or setting. The light was constant, always the same perfect brightness. Jesus showed me the city of God in the distance, with walls that sparkled like jewels and gates made of single pearls. He showed me the throne room where God the Father sat in glory, too bright to look at directly, surrounded by angels and by the elders and by creatures I could not even describe. I heard the worship there, thousands and millions of voices singing praises to God, and the sound was so beautiful that I wanted to join in. Jesus told me that one day I would, but not yet. We walked past gardens and parks and what looked like libraries or universities, places where people could learn and study and grow in knowledge forever. I saw children playing, laughing with pure joy. I saw people of every nation and tribe and language, all living together in harmony. It was everything I had ever dreamed paradise would be, and so much more. Then Jesus led me to a specific house, and he told me this was mine. It was not a mansion or a palace, though some of the houses I had seen were quite grand. It was a beautiful home, perfectly suited to my taste, with a garden in the front and a larger field in the back. The house was made of stone that glowed with a soft light. The door was made of wood that looked ancient and strong. Jesus opened the door and invited me inside. The interior was warm and welcoming, AC with rooms that seemed designed exactly for me. There was a library with books I wanted to read. There was a workshop with tools for creating things. There was a kitchen. Though Jesus explained that we do not need to eat in heaven the way we need to on earth, but we can eat for pleasure because all the food here is perfect and enjoyable. There was a large room with windows that looked out onto the back field, and when I looked out, I saw something that made me laugh with delight. There in the field were 2 horses running and playing. They looked young and strong and full of energy. Jesus smiled and told me these were horses I would have in the new earth, companions for riding and caring for. I had always loved horses as a child, but had never owned any because my family thought it was impractical. Here in heaven, I could have them. I could ride through the meadows and forests of this eternal paradise. I could care for them and build a relationship with them, and they would never grow old or sick or die. As I watched them playing, I saw 3 small dogs running with them, barking and chasing and having the time of their lives. Jesus explained that these were pets I would have, animals that would be mine to love and care for. I had never had dogs on earth, but here I would experience that joy. Everything good that I had missed on earth would be available here, and I would have eternity to enjoy it all. We walked out to the back field, and the horses came running up to us. They nuzzled against Jesus first, and he stroked their necks and spoke to them gently. Then they turned to me, and somehow I knew their names without being told. One was called Storm. The other was called Thunder. The 3 little dogs were also there, jumping and wagging their tails with joy, and I knew their names too: Hope, Grace, and Mercy. Jesus told me something amazing then. He said that animals in heaven have a kind of consciousness and communication that they do not have on earth. They cannot speak in words, but they can communicate with us in a deep way, spirit to spirit. I could feel what they were feeling, their joy and contentment and love. And they could feel what I was feeling. It was a connection I had never experienced with animals on earth, where communication is limited to body language and behavior. Here it was so much deeper and richer. As I stood there in my backfield with Jesus beside me, and these animals around me, I felt a completeness I had never known. This was home, and this was where I belonged. This was what my soul had been longing for my entire life without even knowing it. And then Jesus invited me to walk with him back to the river of life, the same place where we had first sat down together. We walked slowly, and I sensed that something important was about to happen. When we reached the bench by the river, Jesus sat down and motioned for me to sit next to him. The river flowed past us, sparkling and pure, and the trees around us sang their eternal song of worship. Jesus turned to me and his expression became more serious. He said that he had heard my request when I first arrived in heaven. I had asked if I could go back to earth to comfort my wife Amira. At the time, he had not responded. Now he was going to address it. So, Jesus told me that he could not have sent me back to earth at that time because my body was too damaged. My brain had been destroyed by lack of oxygen. My heart had stopped multiple times. My lungs were filled with blood. My organs were shutting down. Even if he had put my spirit back into that body, I would have been trapped inside like a prisoner, unable to communicate, unable to move, unable to do anything. I would have been what the doctors call a vegetable, alive only because machines were keeping my body functioning, but with no consciousness, no awareness, no ability to interact with the world. Jesus said he would never send me back to a fate like that, because it would be cruel and pointless. I would not be able to comfort Amira. Instead, I would only cause her more pain as she watched my empty body, lying in a hospital bed. I knowing I was gone, but unable to let me go. He said that for these reasons he could not send me back as I was. I understood what he was saying. My return to earth was impossible. I was going to stay here in heaven. But then Jesus said something that made my heart leap. He said, however, I could send you back. He paused and let those words sink in. He said that if he chose to do so, he could give me a completely new brain, new lungs, new heart, new kidneys, new liver, new everything. He could recreate my body from the inside out, replacing all the damaged and destroyed parts with perfect, healthy organs. He could send me back to earth in a body that had no sign of ever having been sick or injured. It would be as if I had never died at all. He could do this, he said, in such a dramatic and undeniable way that no doctor or scientist could explain it. The medical records would show that I had been brain dead, and then suddenly I would have a perfect, healthy brain. The evidence would be so clear and so impossible that everyone who saw it would have to admit it was a miracle. They would have to acknowledge that only God could have done such a thing. No medical intervention, no natural process could account for what happened. It would be proof that God is real and that he still performs miracles today. Jesus said that if I agreed to return, he would also give me a complete memory of everything that had happened. I would remember my entire life with perfect clarity. I would remember every moment I spent in heaven. I would remember everything he had taught me, every conversation we had, and every place he showed me. I would have total recall so that I could testify to others about what I had experienced and what I had learned. But there were conditions, he said. There were requirements I would have to accept if I chose to go back. First, I would have to share everything with anyone who asked. I could not keep this experience private. I could not pick and choose who to tell. Anyone who wanted to know about heaven, about my death, about what Jesus taught me, I would have to tell them openly and honestly. Second, I would have to answer any questions people asked me about the Bible, about salvation, about heaven and hell, about God. I would become a teacher and a witness, whether I wanted to or not. This would be my mission and my calling for the rest of my life on earth. Jesus explained the third condition, and this one was hard to hear. He said that the moment I returned to my body, I would experience every bit of pain that my body had gone through from the moment I entered the hospital until the moment I left. The doctors would give me anesthesia and pain medication, but it would not work. I would feel everything as if I had no medication at all. I would feel the intubation attempts. I would feel the tracheostomy being cut into my neck. I would feel the chest compressions breaking my ribs. I would feel the drainage tubes being inserted into my lungs. I would feel every needle, every incision, every procedure. And I would feel it all with full consciousness and full sensation. It would be agony, beyond anything I could imagine. Jesus said that this pain was necessary because it would teach me compassion for others who suffer, and it would remind me of the cost of salvation. He had suffered on the cross to save me. I would suffer in my body to appreciate what he had done. He said that if I could endure the pain and survive it, only then would he allow me to live and complete the mission he was giving me. Jesus looked at me and said the choice was completely mine. I could stay here in heaven, in this beautiful place, with no more pain or sorrow or struggle. I could begin my eternal rest right now. If I chose to stay, he would erase my memory of Amira and my family and everything happening on earth, so I would have no grief or worry about them. I would be perfectly content here, and eventually, if they also chose to follow Jesus, they would join me. Or I could choose to return to earth, to that broken world full of pain and sin and death, knowing that I would suffer greatly and that I would face opposition and possibly persecution for telling the truth about Jesus. He said that if I chose to return, I would likely lose my family, my position, my wealth, possibly even my life. Saudi Arabia does not tolerate Muslims who convert to Christianity. I could be arrested, imprisoned, exiled, or killed. My family would disown me. My friends would abandon me. Everything I had known would be taken away. But I would have the privilege of telling people the truth and possibly leading some of them to salvation before it was too late. I sat there on that bench beside the river of life with Jesus sitting next to me, and I thought about the choice before me: stay in paradise or return to suffering, keep this joy or embrace pain, rest or mission, safety or danger. It should have been an impossible decision. Every logical part of my mind screamed at me to stay here, where everything was perfect. But as I looked at Jesus, as I saw the love in his eyes and remembered everything he had done for me, I knew what my answer had to be. I thought about Amira crying in that hospital hallway. I thought about my family who believed the lies of Islam, just like I had believed them. I thought about millions of people in Saudi Arabia and across the Muslim world who were trying to earn their way to heaven through good works, not knowing that it was impossible, not knowing that there was a free gift available if they would only accept it. I thought about all the people who would die today and tomorrow and the next day, dying without Jesus, spending eternity separated from God because no one told them the truth. And I knew I had to go back. I had to tell them, even if it cost me everything, even if they killed me for it, At least I would die knowing I had tried to save them from the fate I had almost suffered myself. I looked at Jesus and told him I would go back. I said I would accept all the conditions. I would endure the pain. I would share everything. I would answer every question. I would give up my family and my wealth and my position if necessary. I would do whatever he asked me to do. He smiled at me and I saw tears in his eyes. He told me he knew I would make that choice because he had searched my heart and seen that my motives were pure. I was not trying to be a hero. I was not looking for fame or glory. I simply wanted to help others find the truth that had saved me. He said that was the right reason, the only reason that mattered. Then he stood up and took my hand. He said it was time for me to return. He told me to remember everything, to stay strong through the pain, and to never stop telling the truth no matter what happened. And then he embraced me, and I felt such overwhelming love that I started crying again. This was goodbye, at least for now. And in that instant, faster than a heartbeat, I was back in my body on that operating table. And the pain hit me like a wall of fire. The pain was beyond anything I could have imagined. Every nerve in my body screamed at once. I felt the tracheostomy tube in my neck like a burning knife. I felt the breathing tube forcing air into my damaged lungs. I felt the chest compressions that had broken several of my ribs. I felt the needles in my arms and the drainage tubes in my side. I felt everything, all at once, I knew with complete clarity, as if there was no medication in my system at all. Jesus had warned me, but nothing could have truly prepared me for this. I wanted to scream, but I could not because of the tubes in my throat. I wanted to move, to thrash, to do anything to escape the agony. But I was completely paralyzed by the medications they had given me to keep me still. I was trapped in my body, fully conscious, fully aware, experiencing every bit of torture that body had endured. The only thing I could do was endure it, second by agonizing second, and pray that I would survive. But even through the pain, I was aware of something else. I could hear the doctors talking, and what they were saying made no sense to them, but perfect sense to me. Dr. Al-Zahrani was saying that my heart rhythm had suddenly stabilized on its own. The nurse monitoring my brain activity was saying that she was getting readings that should not be possible. Someone else was saying that my oxygen saturation was improving, even though nothing had changed with the ventilator settings. Another voice said that my pupils were responding to light when minutes ago they had been fixed and dilated, a sign of brain death. The medical team was confused and amazed. They had been ready to pronounce me dead, to tell my family that there was nothing more they could do. But now, inexplicably, my body was recovering. Systems that had shut down were starting to function again. Organs that had failed were beginning to work. It made no medical sense, and I could hear the confusion in their voices as they tried to understand what was happening. Dr. Al-Zahrani ordered more tests, and he wanted another brain scan, more blood work, more imaging of my lungs and heart. He told the team to continue monitoring me closely because he did not trust what he was seeing. In his experience, people who had been without oxygen, as long as I had been, did not recover. Their brains were destroyed. Even if their hearts started beating again, they never woke up. They remained in vegetative states, kept alive by machines but with no consciousness, no personality, no ability to interact with the world. He had seen it dozens of times in his career. But something different was happening with me, and he could not explain it. Over the next several hours, as I lay there in that bed experiencing wave after wave of pain, the medical team ran test after test, and every test showed the same impossible thing. I was healing. My brain activity was not just present, it was normal. My lungs were clearing of fluid on their own. My heart was beating strong and steady. My kidneys were producing urine, a sign that they were functioning. My liver enzymes were normalizing. Every system in my body was recovering at a rate that should not have been possible. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of pain, I felt the medications beginning to wear off. The paralysis started to fade. I could feel my fingers and toes. I could move my arms slightly. And then I realized that Amira was in the room. She was standing beside my bed, holding my hand, though I had not been aware of her presence until that moment. She was praying quietly, reciting verses from the Quran, begging Allah to save me. And in that moment, I knew I had to let her know I was alive. And I had to give her some sign. I focused all my energy on my right hand, the one she was holding, and I squeezed her fingers. It was just a small movement, barely noticeable, but she felt it. She gasped and squeezed back. I tried to squeeze again, but I didn't have the strength. That one small movement had taken everything I had. But it was enough. Amira started crying and calling for the doctor, telling him that I had squeezed her hand, that I was responsive, that I was in there. Dr. Al-Zahrani came into the room with a skeptical expression. I could tell he thought Amira was imagining things, grasping at hope where there was none. He had probably seen this before too. Family members so desperate for their loved ones to wake up that they interpret random muscle twitches as purposeful movement. He sat down on a stool next to my bed and leaned in close to my face. Then he did something I will never forget. He shouted at the top of his voice, loud enough that it must have echoed down the hospital corridors. He said his name was Dr. Faisal Al-Zahrani, and that he was my doctor. Then he commanded me, if I could hear him, to raise both my arms. I heard the command clearly. I understood what he wanted. And despite the pain that still racked my body, despite the weakness and exhaustion, I raised both my arms off the bed. I lifted them up toward the ceiling, and I held them there for several seconds before letting them drop back down. The room went completely silent. Dr. Al-Zahrani pushed his stool backwards so fast that it nearly tipped over. He stood up and stared at me with his mouth open, unable to speak. The nurses in the room were equally stunned. One of them whispered something that sounded like a prayer. Dr. Al-Zahrani composed himself and moved back to my bedside. His hands were shaking slightly as he gave me another command. He told me to move my feet. I moved both feet, bending them at the ankles. He told me to wiggle my toes. I wiggled all 10 toes. He told me to look at him. I turned my eyes toward his face and looked directly at him. He told me to blink. I blinked once. He told me to blink faster. I blinked several times in rapid succession. With each command I followed, I could see the disbelief growing on his face. This was not possible. According to everything he knew about medicine, about brain injuries, about oxygen deprivation, I should have been brain dead. There should have been nothing left of my mind or personality. But here I was, following complex commands, showing clear consciousness and awareness. Dr. Al-Zahrani stepped out of the room, and I could hear him talking urgently to someone in the hallway. He was ordering an immediate MRI of my brain. He said he did not care what time it was or who they had to wake up. He needed that scan done within the hour. He came back into my room and told Amira that he did not understand what was happening, but that he was going to find out. He said that the brain scan they had done the day before showed massive damage, essentially no viable brain tissue. But based on my responses, that could not be accurate. Either the previous scan was wrong, or something had changed dramatically. He needed a new scan to compare. Amira asked him if this meant I was going to be okay. Dr. Al-Zahrani hesitated, and I could see him struggling to manage her expectations. He said he honestly did not know. What he was seeing should not be possible, and he did not want to give her false hope until he had more information. They took me for the MRI around midnight. The pain was still intense, but it was beginning to dull slightly, becoming more bearable. They slid me into the machine, and I lay there listening to the loud knocking and humming sounds as it scanned my brain. The technicians kept looking at their screens with confused expressions. I could not see what they were seeing, but I knew what they were finding. Jesus had given me a new brain, just as he promised. When the scan was complete, they brought me back to the intensive care unit, and Dr. Al-Zahrani said he would review the images and come talk to us in the morning. Amira stayed by my bedside all night, holding my hand, crying tears of relief and joy. She kept thanking Allah over and over for saving me. I wanted so badly to tell her the truth, to explain that it was not Allah who had saved me but Jesus. But I could not speak because of the tracheotomy tube. I could only lie there and wait. The next morning, Dr. Al-Zahrani came into my room with several other doctors. He was carrying a tablet computer with medical images on it. He looked at me first, checking my eyes and asking me silent questions that I answered by nodding or shaking my head. Then he turned to Amira and told her he had reviewed all the test results and imaging studies. He said he had compared the brain scan from 2 days ago with the one from last night. He pulled up both images on his tablet and showed them to her side by side. The first image from 2 days ago showed a brain that was almost entirely black, meaning there was no activity, no viable tissue, nothing but dead or dying cells. It was the scan of a brain-dead person. The second image, from last night, showed a completely normal, healthy brain. Every region was intact. Every structure was perfect. There was no sign of damage, no sign of oxygen deprivation. No sign that anything had ever been wrong. Dr. Al-Zahrani told Amira that he had no medical explanation for what he was seeing. He said that in his 30 years of practicing medicine, he had never seen anything like this. He had consulted with neurologists, with other specialists, with colleagues around the world, sending them the images and asking for their opinions. Every single one of them said the same thing. This was medically impossible. A brain that was destroyed does not regenerate. Brain cells do not grow back. Once they are dead, they are gone forever. But somehow, my brain had gone from completely dead to completely healthy in less than 48 hours. He said there was only one word for what had happened, and that word was miracle. He told Amira that her prayers had been answered, that God had intervened, that this was beyond the realm of science and medicine. He said he did not know which God had done this, but clearly some divine power had restored me when all human effort had failed. Over the next few days, they ran more tests. They found that not only was my brain healed, but every other organ in my body was also perfectly healthy. My lungs, which had been filled with blood and fluid, were now completely clear. My heart, which had stopped 3 times, was now beating with perfect rhythm and strength. My kidneys, which had been failing, were now functioning normally. My liver was healthy. My blood tests were all normal. Even my blood type had changed. Before my illness, I had type A positive blood. Now I had type O negative blood. The doctors had no explanation for this. Blood type is determined by genetics. It does not change during a person's lifetime. But mine had changed, and the change was documented in the medical records. They had drawn blood when I first arrived at the hospital, and they had drawn blood again after my recovery. The before and after samples were completely different blood types. Dr. Al-Zahrani told me privately that he was going to write up my case and try to publish it in medical journals because it was so extraordinary. He said that even if people did not believe in miracles, they could not deny the documented evidence. The medical records showed clearly that I had died, that my brain had been destroyed, and that I had recovered completely with no medical intervention that could account for it. He said he had become a doctor because he believed in science and evidence, but this case had challenged everything he thought he knew. He asked me if I remembered anything from when I was unconscious. I nodded yes. He asked if I would tell him about it someday. I nodded again. But I still could not speak because the tracheostomy tube was still in my neck. They needed to remove it before I could talk. The day they removed the tube, I was nervous. I remembered what had happened in the testimony I'd read before, and how the hole in that man's neck had healed overnight with no scar. I wondered if the same would happen to me. Dr. Al-Zahrani explained that after they removed the tube, I would have a hole in my neck, about the size of a large coin. They would cover it with a bandage, and I would have to hold pressure on it when I wanted to talk, pressing the bandage against the hole so air would go through my vocal cords instead of out the hole. He said it would take several weeks for the hole to close up, and even after it healed, I would have a significant scar. He removed the tube in the evening, around 8 o'clock. They cleaned the area and put a bandage over the hole. I tried to speak, pressing on the bandage, and found that I could make sounds. My voice was raspy and weak, but it worked. The first words I spoke were to Amira. I told her I loved her. She cried and kissed my forehead and told me she had been so afraid she would never hear my voice again. That night, I slept deeply for the first time since entering the hospital. The pain had finally subsided to a manageable level. When I woke up the next morning, a nurse came in to change the bandage on my neck. She removed the old bandage and started to clean the area, but then she stopped and stared. She called for Dr. Al-Zahrani to come immediately. He arrived within minutes and looked at my neck with the same shocked expression I'd seen several times now. The hole was completely closed. There was no opening at all. The skin had sealed itself overnight, something that should have taken weeks. And there was almost no scar, just a small thin line, barely visible where the tracheostomy had been. Doctor. Al-Zahrani touched the area gently, examining it from every angle. He asked the nurse if she was sure this was the right patient. She confirmed it was. He looked at me and shook his head slowly. He said this was another impossibility to add to the growing list. Tissue does not heal that fast. Holes that size do not close overnight. But mine had. I spoke without needing to press on anything, and my voice was already stronger and clearer than it had been the night before. I asked Dr. Al-Zahrani if he was ready to hear my story now. He pulled up a chair and sat down. I told him everything. I told him about dying 3 times. I told him about going to heaven and meeting Jesus. I told him about the things Jesus had taught me. I told him about the choice to return and the promise of complete healing. I told him that what he was seeing was not a medical mystery, but a divine miracle performed by Jesus Christ to prove that he is real and that he is God. Dr. Al-Zahrani listened to the entire story without interrupting. When I finished, he sat quietly for a long moment. Then he said that he did not know what to believe about the religious aspects of my experience, but he could not deny the medical evidence. Something extraordinary had happened to me, something that science could not explain, and if I wanted to attribute it to Jesus, he would not argue with me. But Amira's reaction was very different. When I told her the same story later that day, she became upset. She said I was confused, that the trauma and medications had affected my thinking. She said I was still a Muslim and that I had been visited by Allah, not by Jesus. Only she refused to accept that I had converted to Christianity. She begged me not to tell anyone else this story because if my family found out, there would be terrible consequences. I understood her fear. In Saudi Arabia, leaving Islam is considered apostasy, and the penalty for apostasy is death. Even if the government did not execute me, my own family might kill me to preserve the family honor. But I had made a promise to Jesus. I had agreed to tell everyone, to answer every question, to share the truth no matter what it cost me. I could not stay silent to protect myself. I told Amira that I loved her, and I understood her fear, but I had to obey Jesus. I had to tell the truth. She cried and left the room, and I did not see her again for 2 days. When I was finally discharged from the hospital 3 weeks after I'd been admitted, as I went home to find that my family had heard about my testimony. The doctors and nurses had been talking. Word had spread. My father and uncles were waiting for me. They demanded that I recant my statements about Jesus. They said I was bringing shame on the family. They said I was mentally unstable from my illness and needed psychiatric help. They offered to send me abroad for treatment if I would just stop talking about becoming a Christian. I refused. I told them that I was more clear-headed now than I had ever been in my life. I told them that Jesus had shown me the truth, and I could not deny it. I told them that all our good works, all our prayers, all our religious rituals meant nothing if we did not have a relationship with Jesus Christ. I told them that I had been to heaven, and it was real, and Jesus was there, and he was the only way to get there. My father struck me across the face. He told me I was no longer his son. My uncles said I had 1 week to leave Saudi Arabia and never return. If I stayed, they could not guarantee my safety. They would not protect me from what would happen. I understood what they were saying. I was being given a choice: leave the country or be killed. I chose to leave. I took only what I could carry in 2 suitcases. Amira refused to come with me. She said she could not abandon Islam, could not abandon her family, could not follow me into this madness. I told her I would pray for her every day, that I would wait for her, that I hoped she would one day understand the truth I had discovered. She cried but didn't change her mind. I left Saudi Arabia and went to Lebanon, where I connected with some of the Christian organizations I had secretly funded for years. They welcomed me, helped me get settled, and gave me a platform to share my testimony. That was 2 years ago. Since then, I've traveled to many countries telling my story. I have spoken in churches and conferences and universities. I've been interviewed on television and radio. I have written down everything that happened in detailed accounts. And I've seen dozens of people, mostly Muslims from the Middle East, come to faith in Jesus Christ after hearing what happened to me. Some of them have also been disowned by their families. Some have been threatened with death. But they have chosen Jesus anyway because they recognize the truth when they hear it. The miracle that Jesus performed on me, the complete healing of my brain and body, and the documented medical evidence that cannot be explained away, all of it serves as proof that he is real, that he is powerful, and that he loves us enough to do the impossible. I lost everything: my family, my wife, my home, my wealth, my position, my country. Everything I valued in my old life is gone, but I gained something infinitely more valuable. I gained the truth. I gained a relationship with the living God. I gained the certainty of eternal life. I gained a purpose and a mission that fills me with joy, even in the midst of hardship. And I gained the privilege of helping others find what I found. When I look back at the person I was before I died, the person who thought he could earn his way to heaven through good works, I feel such compassion for him. He was sincere but sincerely wrong, and he was trying so hard to save himself when salvation was available as a free gift all along. If you are reading this or listening to this, and you are trying to earn your way to heaven through being a good person, through religious rituals, through charity and good deeds. Please hear me. It will never be enough. The standard is perfection, and none of us are perfect. But Jesus is perfect, and he offers to give us his perfection as a gift. All we have to do is believe in him, trust in what he did on the cross, and accept his payment for our sins. That is the message Jesus sent me back to share. That is the truth that changed my life. And that is the hope I offer to anyone who is searching for certainty about eternity. Jesus is real, heaven is real, and the way to get there is through him and him alone.